Welcome everyone, the Essex County Field Naturalist Club June 2021 meeting. My name is Corey Reno, the club vice president. Thank you for joining our presentation presented live over Zoom. So tonight's presentation will focus on the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas and will be presented by Paul Pratt and Karen Cedar, from the Essex County Regional Coordinators, and they'll also be joined tonight by our special guest, Kaelyn Bumelis, the Assistant Provincial Coordinator of the Atlas Project. So after their presentation, we'll open it up to questions. You can either unmute yourself or simply raise your hand in Zoom or add your question to the chat and we'll address it at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to turn tonight's presentation over.
All right, so hopefully everyone is able to see my screen okay. Just the thumbs up.
Looks good. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So I'm Kaelyn Bumelis, and I'm the assistant coordinator for the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, and that just started this year for data collection. So it's pretty exciting. Before I get started, I guess I'm just wondering how many of you guys have heard of the Atlas. I know Paul gave a bit of a talk before, so maybe some of you are signed up as participants or anything like that. I don't know if you guys have the thumbs up option or anything. Yeah, thumbs up, perfect. So yeah, that's great. It seems like a lot of you know about it or are registered. So that's really great news. And so some of this may be familiar to you, but it's always nice to get a refresher. So I guess one thing to be proud of if you're Atlasers in the past Atlas would be this great accolade from Margaret Atwood about how much of an achievement Atlas II was. And so I guess it really just kind of speaks to how big the Atlas project is and how impactful it can be. So what is the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas? I'm sure all of you must know from Paul giving his talk previously, but it's a project that aims to map the distribution and relative abundance of Ontario's roughly 300 species of breeding birds. So that's all of Ontario from the most southern point all the way up to Hudson Bay. And we're doing this over 5 years. So from 2021 to 2025 is the data collection period. And then the 2 years after that, 26 and 27, we'll be gathering all that data together and writing up the species accounts. So it does take quite a long time and is such a big project. And I'm really excited to be part of it. This is truthfully my first Atlas. So yeah, I'm really excited. The Atlas is a partnership project. And so it's a partnership project of these 5 organizations: Birds Canada, OMNRF, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Ontario Nature. But it really is so much more than that. We do have a lot of supporters, and we have all of our volunteers and regional coordinators and everyone too. So it is a partnership project of these 5 organizations, but a lot more people involved too. So how does the Atlas kind of work, I guess? The Atlas divides the province into regions. So there are 47 regions in Ontario for the Atlas, and they are all run by regional coordinators. And so obviously Karen and Paul are the regional coordinators for Region 1 here. Each region is then broken up even further into 10 by 10 kilometer squares. And so that's what you can see kind of on the far right there. And so these 10 by 10 kilometer squares is kind of what we base all of our goals and targets on, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So again, just mentioning the regional coordinators and how important they are, because they really are kind of the touch point between the Atlas headquarters, if you will, and the Atlasers. And so you can see here, Karen and Paul's bio here on the website. And so, yeah. So atlases, they happen every 20 years. So the first atlas in Ontario happened in 1981, and the data collection went from 1981 to 1985. So the first atlas was really focused on mapping the distribution of the breeding birds in Ontario, whereas in Atlas II, that's when standardized point counts really became part of part of the technical aspect of the atlas and something that was we tried to get more done. And so that's when relative abundance really became an integral part of some of the analyses that we were able to do. And so that is a pretty big deal, and we're going to be repeating those point counts here in Atlas 3. Another thing about Atlas 2 was that we were able to compare the distribution that we found in Atlas 2 to Atlas 1. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. If you haven't had the opportunity to look at the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas 2 book, this is what it looks like. This is kind of this a spread that would be in the book. Well, that is in the book, of course. And so it includes text, so expert interpretation of the results. It talks about the distribution and population status, breeding biology, and abundance. It includes a breeding evidence map, and so this is more so the distribution, so where there was breeding evidence found for that particular species. It talks about the distribution, so current and past. So again, that's comparing Atlas 2 back to what was found in Atlas 1. This map on the top right, that's the relative abundance map. So this is based on the point counts. And so we got around 70,000 point counts in Atlas 2. Atlas 2 was the first in North America to conduct point counts as part of the standardized survey. And so when we're doing point counts here in Atlas 3, we'll be able to compare them back to Atlas 2. And finally, what's in the book is the change statistics. So based on models and mapping, we're able to provide comparisons across regions and across time. And so it's, you can't really see it, but this kind of shows like Hudson Bay, the Northern Shield, and other parts of Ontario, as well as Ontario as a whole, kind of at the very bottom there. It's very small. So more than 10,000 breeding sites of rare species and breeding colonies were documented in Atlas 2, which was a pretty big deal. And so this graph kind of represents the changes in distribution between atlases, so between Atlas 2 and Atlas 1. And so it shows the difference in the number of squares that a species was reported in. So on the left-hand side, these are increases in the number of squares between Atlas 2 and Atlas 1. So you can see, obviously, Canada geese expanded quite a lot. They were found in 1,022 more squares in Atlas 2 than in Atlas 1. Other notable species are the turkey vulture, bald eagle, sandhill crane is on there as well. On the right-hand side, in the red, is the decreases in number of squares between Atlas 2 and Atlas 1. So a lot of the species on there are going to be your aerial insectivores. You can see the top three are common nighthawk, chimney swift, and bank swallow. Other aerial insectivores are on that list as well. So this is the distribution map from Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas 2. All of the squares that have yellow dots in them are squares that sandhill cranes were found in Atlas 2 that they were not found in Atlas 1. So you can see that they were found in a lot more squares in Atlas 2 than the previous atlas. In comparison, one of our aerial insectivores, the purple martin, all of those black dots are squares that purple martins were found in Atlas 1 that they were not found in Atlas 2. So a significantly less amount of squares that the purple martin were found in, and that was kind of the same for a lot of the aerial insectivores. And so that brings us to Atlas 3, again, starting this year and going to 2025 for the data collection. We're doing a lot of things the same and trying to repeat a lot of stuff from Atlas 2, so trying to repeat some of the point count locations, trying to get to the same squares, but there's also a lot of things that we're trying to kind of enhance or improve on for Atlas 3. So this is a slide, if you've ever heard Mike Cadman talk, this is a Mike Cadman slide, and I just love it. I think it's so fun. Atlas 3 is an all hands on deck, no holds barred, pull out all the stops, science-based inventory of the birds of the province. Powered by Ontario's birding community, and just about the most useful thing you can do as a birder. And it's really fun too. And so this is obviously my first atlas, but I can tell you that I've really enjoyed it so far. So I'll have to take his word for it, or maybe I'll have to take my word for it. Okay, so what are the goals for Atlas 3? Our goals are to determine and map the distribution and relative abundance of breeding birds in Ontario, as I have mentioned, and compare that to previous atlases. So some of the maps that I just showed you, comparing Atlas 2 to Atlas 1, we're obviously looking to do that again for Atlas 3, comparing to Atlas 2, and also to compare the maps of relative abundance. So as I mentioned, Atlas 2 was kind of the first time we were really trying to get those point counts done as part of the protocol. And so we're trying to repeat those here in Atlas 3 so that we can compare the relative abundance between Atlas 3 and Atlas 2. So yeah, determine population size and compare to previous atlases. Gather data on breeding locations and abundance for significant species, for example, species at risk. Expand and enhance our coverage of the North. So we're looking to get more coverage done in the North this time around. And ensure data are available for research and conservation projects. So we're going to have this data kind of openly available, and that's definitely something that we've made a priority of doing. So that's on our list as well. So I mentioned that some things are going to be enhanced or improved upon or a little bit different for Atlas 3. And so data collection for Atlas 3 is going to be done by volunteers and professional biologists, as it always has been, but also by autonomous recording units. And so these are units that you can go and you put out and they record for a certain amount of time, and then you can bring them back and upload the data and then have interpreters determine what species were present around the recording unit. So that's one really cool piece of technology that we've got our hands on for Atlas 3 and is really going to help us kind of improve our coverage in a lot of places, especially in the North. Okay, so a little bit more about the coverage goals. I mentioned that the Atlas regions are broken down even further into these 10 by 10 kilometer squares. And so in each of these squares, we're looking to get 20 hours of atlasing in the peak season. And so here in Southern Ontario, that's going to be May 24th to July 10th. In the North, it'll be June 1st to July 10th. And so that's 20 hours over the 5 years of the atlas. So if I'm working in one square, then, you know, if you were to break it up evenly, it would be kind of 4 hours a year. And then 25 point counts. So as I mentioned, these are help us determine relative abundance. And so again, these are 25 point counts that are done over the span of the 5 years. Each one would only need to be done the one time. This time around, we are also doing some special surveys. During the last atlas, there was an Eastern Screech Owl survey that was done, but it wasn't really as, I guess this time we're really trying to push the owl surveys, as well as nightjar surveys and marsh bird surveys. So I'll talk a little bit about those later as well. Just gonna have a sip of this Gatorade here. Okay, so that last slide was targets on the square level, but this is kind of our overall coverage goals for the entire province. So you can see here in the southern portion of Ontario, that really dark green there, we're looking to get 100% of squares done with the full coverage. So 100% of squares would have those 20 hours and the 25 point counts. After you get past in that kind of lighter green, we're looking to get around 5% of squares with the 20 hours and the 25 point counts. And then even further still north, 2% of squares with that, with the survey effort or the square effort completed. So here again is the 10 kilometer square map, but now it has all that, all the, I don't even know, mess on the side, all the information there on the side. And so each of these square maps will let you know where the point count locations are. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but where it says easting and northing, those are all the point count locations. You can see them on the map because they're noted with a little plus sign. In the legend, it also tells you how much of each habitat type are in that particular square. So in this one, it has a lot of agriculture. You can't really see that, but I think it says 68 or something along those lines. And so this helps people to figure out, okay, where do I need to go atlasing? Because we want people to atlas kind of proportionally to the habitat, if that makes sense. So if there's a lot of agriculture or a lot of broadleaf forest, then you want to do a lot of your atlasing there. And so that's kind of the same thing for where it says number of off-road point counts. So how it says broadleaf forest 4 and mixed forest 1, that's because we want point counts to be done in habitats that are the most prevalent in the square. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, so no worries if you're a bit lost. So here we are in Essex County. So this is Region 1. That's pretty exciting. And so this is kind of the coverage that's been going on so far in Essex County. The left map there with all the squares is the total number of hours that have gone into atlasing in Essex. And the right is the number of peak hours. So remember that starts on May 24th. So that's pretty impressive for just the past week, I want to say, right? And so the legend on the right shows the very lightest orange is less than 10 hours, the medium orange is 10 to 19, and the darkest orange is greater than 20 hours of effort put in. And so far in Essex, there have been 235 checklists, 97 species, 143 total hours, and 43 peak hours in Essex. So that's pretty good. So I mentioned before that Atlas 3 is going to have a few differences from Atlas 2, and one of those things is spatially explicit checklists. And so in Atlas 2, someone would have a square and they would go in and they kind of would, you know, I don't want to say tick off the species as they saw them, but that is kind of what happened. And then this time, we're having a checklist for each time you go out atlasing. So if you go out atlasing and you see a robin, you're going to check it off, you know, when you see it. And if you go out again, you check it off each time. Whereas before you would just have to do it, you know, the once, and then it would be, you know, confirmed in your square. Or and so yeah, so the data will show the count and the breeding evidence by point or by track. And so if you see the map on the right, the different ways you can put in the data are a track. So for example, a track on a road or on a trail, or a stationary point. You can also put in data at the whole square level. So just say, I was in this square when I went atlasing, but the more precise you can be with your data, the better. So that's kind of why I use these examples. One good thing about doing tracks or points or being able to kind of pinpoint your atlasing to those locations is for either protected areas, so seeing how the protected areas are benefiting the region, or if there are any species or sites of interest, then we'll be able to kind of identify those easier if we have, say, a trail or a track or these spatially explicit checklists. It's kind of like e-birding. For those of you who are e-birders, it's quite similar, just going out and doing your checklists, but this time with breeding evidence. So as I mentioned, one good thing about this is that you'll be able to identify locations of significant species. So on all of our data forms and on our other methods of data entry, we do have significant species kind of marked. So we have the rare species, so these are SARA listed species. We have significant species, so these are sometimes colonial species or other species of interest. And then we have regionally rare species, so species that don't show up in your region as frequently. So with these spatially explicit checklists, you're able to add precise locations of these records so that this information can go towards kind of conservation in the future. So I guess the one thing about the atlas and atlasing that's maybe different than your regular birding or e-birding is the breeding evidence. Of course, it's the breeding bird atlas. And so there are different levels of breeding evidence that range from observed to confirmed. And so as you go down the list, they get closer and closer to being confirmed breeding. And so I think a lot of you are already atlasers, so have likely already seen this. And so I'll just kind of go along. One thing that did confuse quite a few people this year was the X observed. And so the one thing about the X code is that the species is observed in the breeding season, but with no breeding evidence. So for example, summering gulls or, you know, early or late migrants. There's also possible breeding, which is being seen in the proper habitat or herd singing. Probable include courtship displays, holding a territory for a week or more, seeing a pair, for example, the pair of wood ducks, or antagonistic behavior between two males. And then we have confirmed breeding, which of course would include, you know, fledged young, nests with eggs, carrying food. And so the applications of the data are Casero and Kasiwick designations. So I've read quite a few reports even recently that still use Atlas data because that's, you know, the best data that they have for certain species. And so this next Atlas will really be able to contribute to those and really update those, providing information for recovery strategies, population distribution, survey designs, conservation planning. The list really does go on. I've seen Atlas data used in so many different ways. So Atlas 3 is going to be a great adventure for the province's birders, and we really can't do it without the help of the birders. You know, during Atlas 2, I think there was something like 3,000 volunteers that contributed data. And so, you know, I can't go out there and Atlas all the squares myself, and I really do appreciate all of the help of all of the volunteers. And so it really is not possible without the help of the province's birders. So here we are to volunteer opportunities. I know a lot of you said that you are Atlasers, and that's really great. So maybe this is, you know, kind of repeat information for you, or maybe you're able to kind of take a little bit more away from this. But for beginner Atlasers, general atlasing or atlasing at your level, you know, if you're out and you're able to find breeding evidence and you can identify the bird, that's great. As long as you're confident in what you're submitting, then that's good to have. Owl and nightjar surveys are really great for beginner atlasers, mainly just because when you go out for these surveys, you're only really looking for one or a couple species. And so, for example, these nightjar surveys, you're probably going to be looking for nighthawks and whippoorwills, and potentially, you know, if you're able to listen out for other things, that's great. But you know, if you're able to learn those few things you're looking for, then it's a really great survey for beginners. Digital point counts. So I mentioned the ARUs, the automated recording units earlier. Digital point counts are very similar. You go out with a handheld recording device and you do the point counts, but you just record them instead of actually listening for them yourself. And I'll talk a little bit more about point counts later if you're not entirely sure about those. So for intermediate and advanced atlasers, obviously you can do all the things that beginner atlasers are doing. There's nothing holding you back from that, but there's a few extra things that you're able to do as well. And that would be the traditional point counts. So, you know, going out to the point count location and during a 5-minute period, jotting down everything you see and hear. Marsh bird surveys. So these are a little bit tougher than the owl and nightjar surveys, just because there's a lot of different bird species that are going to be present during these surveys. So they are a little bit tougher and require a bit higher of a birding skill than the owl and nightjar surveys. And then northern atlasing. So not only do you probably need to be an intermediate or advanced birder for the northern atlasing, the far north atlasing, but also need to be really outdoorsy, really kind of experienced in that sort of thing as well. So that one is kind of an extra toughie, I guess you could say. All right, so for general atlasing, there are a few different ways that you could do this. So general atlasing is when you go out and you do those checklists that I mentioned, the spatially explicit checklists, either with your track or your point, and you record all the bird species that you see in here with the breeding evidence. So a primary atlaser ensures a square is adequately covered with the 20 hours of atlasing and 25 point counts. So this is not to say that you need to do all of those 20 hours of atlasing yourself, but you do need to ensure that it gets done. And so what I mean by this is that if other folks are atlasing in that square, then it could contribute to the 20 hours of atlasing. You also will want to make sure that the atlasing is done in the appropriate habitats and that the point counts, the off-road point counts at least, are done also in the appropriate habitats. The optional special surveys for primary atlasers are owl surveys, the nightjars, and marshbird surveys. So yeah, those are kind of options for primary atlasers. Again, this is region 1, Essex, so you can see the blue dots are squares that are assigned a primary atlaser. There's still a few that are unassigned, but it's year 1, there's lots of time. And so yeah, if you do want to take on a square, make sure to reach out to your RCs. All right, freelance atlasers. So freelance atlasers help to ensure the region and the province is adequately covered in the ways that I've mentioned before, the 20 hours and the point counts. And so essentially anyone can atlas in any square because, you know, we have an app now and online data entry, and kind of people are a bit more mobile. And because it's the checklist version of things, it's a little bit easier to be able to submit data from any square. And so if you're going out atlasing, you can atlas from wherever. Essentially, the freelancers are supposed to help get the coverage to where we need it to be, help to find all the species in every square, maximize breeding evidence for all species. So, you know, if upgrade it from a probable to confirmed breeding, checklist from poorly birded areas. So getting out from kind of the typical hotspots and trying to find the niche places. And to help out with special surveys. So in some instances, some folks might not want to do the point counts in their square, or might not want to do the owl, nightjar, or marshbird surveys in those squares. And freelance atlasers can definitely feel free to pick those up, whether it be in the Essex region or in other regions too. Obviously, this year we've been a little bit hindered because of COVID in terms of going out and helping out other regions with these things, but it's a 5-year project, so hopefully in future years, we'll be able to kind of spread out a little bit more and share the wealth of our populated areas. All right, so in terms of finding all the species in a square or region, you can look at the square summary sheet, which I'll talk about in a minute. You'll want to focus on the hard to find species, so rare, elusive, poorly known. Visit special habitats and sites. So like I said, don't just stick to the hotspots. Make sure you're going to, you know, wetlands, riparian areas, large habitat patches, all sorts of different spots. So this is the square summary sheet. And essentially what it tells you is what was found in that specific square, the last atlas. So that's the previous column. So for Canada goose, it says the previous is fledged young. That's the highest breeding evidence from Atlas 2. The code column tells you what the highest breeding evidence is for this atlas. So for this atlas, it's P for pair. And so you'll obviously want to be able to upgrade that code as much as you can. That might involve going to the same site a little bit down the line. If you see a bird maintaining a territory, you might want to go back later and see if you can upgrade that. You obviously want to be taking the safe dates into consideration. So safe dates are essentially when you can feel confident in a specific code that you're using. And so I'm not going to delve too much into this. It can be a little bit dry at times, but there is more information about this on the website. You don't need to worry about it too much right now, mainly just because we're not really in any kind of shoulder season. Most things should be in the safe date right now. So back to point counts a little bit. If you are a more experienced atlaser and you do want to get out and do the point counts, then essentially you want to do the lowest 20 on-road point counts that you can. So that will be 1 to 20 if you're able. If, for example, number 9 is not really viable, say it's super noisy, you could then go up to 21 and just skip number 9. For the off-road point counts, you want to do 5 of them, and the square map will tell you in what habitats you want to be doing them in. So in this case, it's 4 broadleaf forests and 1 mixed forest. And so if you're doing point counts, I would recommend kind of scouting them out ahead of time. This way, you don't get to it and realize this is, a super noisy spot or something like that. And again, the point counts, they contribute to these relative abundance maps. And so these are just a few of the relative abundance maps that are included in Atlas 2. All right, and so northern work, for those looking for an extra challenge, more than just point counts or marsh bird surveys. Obviously, we're not doing northern work this year. COVID has been a bit of a barrier, so we're going to have to go to these in future years. And so the priority squares for northern work are mainly squares that were adequately covered by atlasers in Atlas 2. So the red squares on this map are ones that had 20 or more hours and 20 or more point counts. The orange ones are 10 or more hours and 10 or more point counts. And so, like I said, we're going to try to get back to as many of these squares as possible. A lot of this, a lot of the kind of excess will be covered by ARUs to fill the gaps. So I mentioned that we want to increase our coverage of the north, and that's kind of one of the main ways that we're intending to do that is through the ARU work. This is the far north, and so these are some of the trips that that took place during Atlas 2 and that we're looking into repeating. Again, obviously not this year because of COVID, but in future years. And then these are some of the places that we're looking into putting out ARUs. So a lot of this might be done by the Canadian Wildlife Service, the Ontario Division. And so yeah, it's quite a hefty amount. So in terms of submitting Atlas data, there are 2 ways through the actual Atlas itself. One is the app, which is still under development. And so we did recently get a new update to it, but there still is an issue with iOS devices where it's been pushing it to the background and pushing it to drafts as a result. You can also record your data on paper, notebook, checklist, or data form and enter it through the Nature Counts portal online. Another option is to import data through eBird. So enter the data in eBird and then import it through Nature Counts. The only trouble with this is, it doesn't show you the square boundaries, so you don't know if you're crossing square boundaries, which you're not supposed to do. And B, there is a lot of flagging in the Nature Counts app and online portal where it will tell you, for example, if you use carrying food for a species that doesn't typically carry, like that sometimes carries food for reasons other than to bring it back to young, Nature Counts will alert you of that, whereas eBird will not. So it is possible, but there are a few things that you should be a little bit wary of. Okay, and so that's it. We've done it twice. Let's do it again. I mean, this will be my first time, but I'm looking forward to Atlas 3 and really, yeah, just building up this community of Atlasers and getting the best data we can. So yeah, thank you very much, and looking forward to chatting with you guys.
That's great. Thank you, Kaelyn. That's fantastic. I'm an Atlaser, really looking forward to getting out more and doing more this year. So really helpful presentation. So we'll just open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions for Kaelyn or any of the other regional coordinators, being Paul and Karen Cedar. Paul Pratt.
Yeah, Paul and Karen might have some really great things that are Essex specific. I had some stats for you guys, but I'm not in Essex, so I don't know all the really great birds that might be there.
We've already got a new species we've never had breeding in the region before, confirmed, trumpeter swan.
Oh, yay.
Has pair has young, and one of our squares, which is very, very exciting to.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm writing that down.
And we have a good number of people that have signed up and registered for the Essex region. So I think we'll have lots of people, and we've even had a few people do some point counts. I think we've up to 18 right now, but it's a start anyway.
Oh, that's great. Like it just started last week, and that's the thing, is that the Atlas is 5 years, and it's just crazy to me how much it has already been done, like, anyway, yeah.
And, there's a comment in the chat here also about the pelicans out in the islands. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
okay.
Yeah, this is being recorded. I think Corey mentioned at the start. And so if I went a little bit too quick for you, you can always rewatch it at a later date. So, and you'll be able to pause it if I rewind it if I'm talking too quickly. So that's always the benefit. That's the benefit of Zoom, is that these things can be recorded.
That actually can kind of lead to a question that might help solve that. Are there training presentations specifically about like data entry or anything like that available? So that may help.
Absolutely, yeah. So they're available on the Atlas YouTube page. And so that's Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas -3. It's also linked on our website. birdsontario.org has links to our YouTube page too. And so there's a whole playlist called Atlas Tutorials, and most things you can imagine are on there. How to submit data through the various ways and means.
Perfect. We'll share the links for that as well, and the links to the websites or the website and the YouTube channel. We'll get that on and out to our members as well.
Yeah. So this will be available for people to review at their leisure.
Yeah. Are there any other questions out there? Again, you can feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or add it to the chat.
Well, I've got a question.
Yep,
I've got a Carolina wren nesting, as you usually do, in my canoe, and it's a nest with eggs last week. But today I'm sitting out having a drink on my patio, and he's carrying food to the same nest. Now, I've already recorded it as NE. Do I record it today because I saw him going there as CF? Or do I?
Yeah, you can. So one good thing about that is that it will kind of give, having that update really gives an idea of phenology. And if people are constantly going back and kind of upgrading their breeding evidence and that sort of thing, then yeah, we are kind of going to be trying to look into phenology. And so that would be useful for that sort of thing.
Great. Okay. Any other questions? Just double checking the chat here. Okay, not seeing anything new. Okay. Well, Paul or Karen, did you have anything else?
I'm just very excited to be involved for the third time with the Atlas project, and I think we're going to see a lot of changes, both species that are increasing and species that are decreasing. I know one species I didn't have on my list for breeding around here is pine warbler, and I've had several in the spruce plantations in Wheatley Provincial Park and Two Creek Conservation Area just on the north side of Wheatley that were surprised. So I think we go out, we'll make discoveries.
Yeah, that's awesome. Does anyone else here like have a square that they've taken on, and have you started on that?
I can start with that. We've taken on my family's taken on a few squares. We're looking forward to actually. What I really like about it is being able to explore different areas where I wouldn't normally go birding. So I'm really looking forward to that. Looking some areas downtown in Amherstburg here. It'll be quite interesting to see what's around. That we've just passed over. birding all these years. I'm really excited for it. So
Is this your first Atlas?
yes, this is my first.
Nice. Yeah, me too.
Anybody else on there is taking a square?
Has anyone else here started atlasing at all or has done any atlasing before or even now?
Well, yes.
Yeah, you've done some atlasing. Was it this year or in previous atlases?
Well, I helped out the last couple of years of Atlas 2 because that's when I retired. But no, I've got the Kingsville Square and I'm pretty happy and enjoying doing it. I've done a fair bit already. So
Oh, yay, that's great. Have you found it so far?
fun. It's really challenging, but it's nice to be able to record your observations and figure they're going to be used somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all turns out. I love this kind of stuff. Figuring it all out and seeing it at the end is my favorite part, but I have to wait for that.
Yeah.
Oh, someone has their hand up. David.
Hi, I know I just had a funny one today. I found a recently fledged tufted titmouse, and he's doing the wing flip and begging for food for a parent, and they're not giving him anything. And then he tried it on a blue-gray gnatcatcher who attacked him.
Oh,
Interesting.
Was that over by Black Oak or?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Actually, it's been pretty good there. Actually, I've got a couple trips there, 1 week apart, and nothing amazing, but a lot of good stuff.
excellent.
great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up, but just want to say thank you, Kaelyn. That was fantastic. Again,
No
we'll
worries.
share this presentation with everybody, and we'll have the links to the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas website and the YouTube channel for anybody that wants to follow up. And also, Paul and Karen are the regional coordinators, so if you have questions, you can actually reach out to them directly, or just reach out to the club and we can pass your questions along. So no problems there. So again, thank you very much, Kaelyn. Really appreciate your time.
Yes.
No worries. Yeah, it was great chatting with you guys.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
All right.
Hey, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
So-